creating a world where every kid gets an education they love, one that makes the most of their talents and capacities. That's really like real for me. And so the two parts of that are, how do you reach every kid? And then how do you give each kid these kind of learning experiences they love? Smartphones were part of the answer to the first part. It was like, oh, that tailwind gave us some distribution and growth. AI is an amazing answer to the second part. So if we can build the leading network for our demographic, which had never been built before, if we could build it, we'll have a lot of time and lots of ways that we could monetize and build a great business. If we never build a network, then we're just going to run out of growth channels, and it's not going to be like an enduring business. There's going to be like a prime type thing for education, and that's, I think, what ClassDojo Plus. This is our subscription for families. And so we're like, look, can we build a product or build something that's so valuable that it'll just be a no-brainer for families to buy it?
Welcome to Subversive, a podcast dedicated to sharing stories from the best consumer subscription apps in the world. We'll bring you lessons for how to grow your consumer subscription business, including insights and inflection points that led to exponential growth from leaders at category-defining companies and innovative startups. Let's get into the show. This episode is brought to you by RevenueCat. The world's best apps use RevenueCat to power purchases, manage customer data, and grow revenue on iOS, Android, and the web. Join more than 100,000 apps that are already using RevenueCat to grow their businesses and track more than $10 billion in spend, including category leaders like OpenAI, Notion, and Ladder. Learn more at revenuecat.com/subversive. My guest today is Sam Chaudhary, co-founder and CEO of ClassDojo, an education platform used in roughly 95% of US K-8 schools and by tens of millions of students across 180 countries worldwide. In this episode, I talked to Sam about how ClassDojo grew teacher by teacher in a market that most investors had written off as unfundable, about how the company ultimately turned a free classroom tool into a paid consumer subscription product for parents without breaking teacher trust, and about why Sam is now betting on AI and gamification to build a broader platform for childhood. All right, welcome, Sam, to the Subversive Podcast. Excited to talk about your company, ClassDojo, today. You're the founder and CEO of ClassDojo, and as somebody who spent a good part of my career in EdTech, this is a company I've been following for a long time. I'm sure my kids will be using it soon. And so excited to talk more about your experience. But let's just start with your professional background and then maybe a little bit about what ClassDojo is for those who don't already know.
Well, cheers, Phil. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to see you. My background, I went to quite an odd school. So I grew up in the UK and then the Middle East. In the Middle East, my school insisted on kids teaching as well as learning. And so I ended up teaching for maybe about a third of my time through school, which is, in retrospect, kind of a crazy experience. I hadn't realized how unusual that was. I was an economist at college. I was heading towards a PhD. I thought I'd just do some more academia and that would be it. One of my professors in my last year asked me to go and help a friend of his with his school. He'd heard about my crazy teaching experience. And so I went to this school and ended up just helping them teach economics and some maths a lot better than the way they were doing before. We can double click into what changes my school made. But this became like a very formative experience for me. Shortly after that, McKinsey, the consulting firm, had been in touch, and they had an education division that was just launching. And this is advising; it's not doing the thing, but it was a great opportunity to go and speak to all the kind of education ministers at the top performing education systems to get a look at how they were doing. So I was I guess I like slipped in a way into this education stuff after the stuff at school. And then shortly after that, I met my co-founder, Liam, and I can tell you a bit more about how we got started. He's an incredible guy. But just to answer the other part of your question, for those that don't know, ClassDojo is an education technology company. We started as a communication app for teachers and kids and parents. It's since grown into a lot more. The mission of the company is to give every kid on earth an education they love. We serve about 1 in 4-ish families in the US every week now, and many more than that internationally. So we can dive into all the things that we're doing, but that's the bare bones.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, 1 in 4, that is massive market penetration. And it sounds like you guys are just getting started. I know you've launched a couple of new products recently that we're going to talk more about later in the episode. Before we do that, I mean, first of all, I love your point around I have heard the adage, like, learn one, do one, teach one. I think teaching can be one of the best ways of really cementing your knowledge and learning more deeply. And so it's great that you, as a child, got the experience to teach as much as you were learning. I want to go back to, you mentioned your co-founder, Liam.
Yeah.
You all originally were working on an idea that looked a little different than ClassDojo. And so what did that look like? And how did you ultimately make your way to the original version of what became ClassDojo?
Yeah, well, so Liam and I met at a hack weekend, actually, in the UK. And so we worked on something totally different there. I think it was some Mac app or whatever. I don't even remember. It was so long ago. But it was a kind of a weekend hack project. And maybe I'll have Liam on the show one day, but he's brilliant, right? He was a video game developer. He was at a company called Jagex, which built one of the world's biggest kids games called RuneScape. He was doing a PhD in computer science. It was focused on technology that helps kids learn. So he and I got talking about, we met in our 20s and we were really talking about like the big problems that you could work on. And I remember we kind of got it down to like two. One was energy and one was education. The thinking was that you need enough energy just to fund all of human activity. Everyone realized what energy is now, but I think it's always been important. The second thing then was, well, if you have survival because we have enough energy, then how do things get better? How does the future get better than the past? And my view is that, well, you need people to discover their talents and capacities. And I think even in a very AI kind of pilled future, you want people to be central to that future. You want humanity to be central to it. And so you really do want people to discover their talents, their capacities, and be able to make the most of them. And that's broadly speaking what education does. So, we were very inspired by kind of both problems, but the second one is something that we both spent time working on. And that's kind of where the impetus for Dojo emerged from. Now, we didn't know what the right starting point was. But at the same time, there was an education incubator that had launched, which then folded back into Y Combinator. It was kind of affiliated with YC and then folded back in. And they were opening applications for their first cohort. And so we applied. We were like, oh, this is like, what a fortuitous moment. So we applied. We got into this first cohort. And, we didn't have like a fully formed idea, but we had like this big picture view that it seemed like there were a lot of companies that had been built that were selling things to schools and districts. And there weren't that many companies that were building great products for teachers and kids and parents. There's like pre-Duolingo and like a lot of the consumer products. And so we didn't have much of an inkling of, okay, what's the exact right entry point? But that was like the general orientation. I think we built like a small app just to show the application crew that we could build apps, and we built like a seating app where you can make seating charts in the classroom, very trivial stuff, but it changed pretty quickly out.
Well, that was back in the days where creating an app was a lot harder than it is now, where you can vibe code it in a weekend. So I imagine that was an important part of the application process.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think this is an important point because often the conventional wisdom is start B2B, like B2B is easier than consumer, but you went a bit of a contrarian route, which was you decided to go teacher by teacher, build it bottoms up rather than selling top down into schools and districts. And that turned out to be a really critical part of your growth strategy was this sort of bottoms up teacher by teacher movement. And that started with, you talked to hundreds of teachers in your first few weeks as you were getting traction with this idea. So what did you learn in those conversations? And what were the insights that became so important to the next step of the company's growth?
Yeah, well, just to put it in context, we were two 20-somethings who just turned up in California. We never worked in EdTech before, didn't know much about this whole kind of industry, had never gone to school in the US. And so we were on like a learning mission, and we be very quick about it. And so we got here and we started to meet EdTech founders. And basically, we kind of got like very quickly discouraged. It seemed like a not that like a very difficult space. We're like, well, if you go back to first principles, we're like, well, hold on. Every family on the planet wants a better education for their kid. And so theoretically, you should be able to build a company that serves every family on the planet. And given how deep a need it is and deep a desire it is from parents to want better for their kids, you should be able to build quite a big company. But there weren't great examples of big companies. There weren't companies that, reached 1 billion people, that had really transformed how things were working. Classrooms have kind of worked the same way for a long time. There weren't any really big public companies that had come about. And so, you kind of have to ask why. We kind of arrived at like a thesis, diagnosis, which I think is still true today. We saw that there's like a lot of companies that build their businesses selling the B2B route. There's nothing per se wrong with that, but I think like everyone knows it's a very, very difficult sales process. And so it tends to be like quite slow and it can take quite a long time. But I think the second thing that we realized was that there's actually like an incentive problem there. That this Charlie Munger quote, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Like our view is we're like, well, you really want to tie your incentives to the customer. Right? And the customer in this case are families, like kids and their families, that's the person we're all trying to serve, whether you're a teacher or an EdTech company or whatever. We're like, well, hold on. We don't want to build a product that can just get sold. And, you've probably used some EdTech stuff in schools, not the greatest software, just going to get sold and stays there for years. And we're like, we don't want to build one of those. We want to build something that people actually want and that actually, like our survival in a way, lives and dies on people benefiting from our product. And so we kind of made this very principled decision early on that, look, we're going to build a company for kids and families in the best interest of kids and families. We want our incentives to be tied to kids and families. We should live or die based on our ability to serve kids and families. And so we kind of took this almost like very principled stance early on. And at the time, I think people looked at us like we were crazy. They were like, what? No one does that. I think Duolingo was just starting out as well. And like we're the only two that are thinking this way. And so we kind of decided to be a consumer company. And then we had, I think, basically the most formative conversation in the early days of the company. Reid Hoffman came to the incubator and he did a talk at the incubator. And, you probably know Reid, he's Mr. Network Effect. And so he got excited. He was like, look, nobody really builds consumer companies. Even at the time, there were very few that were being started, But he's like, the number one thing you have to figure out if you're building a consumer company is how are you going to grow? Like, how are you going to reach your consumers? Because all of your growth channels will eventually get too expensive and, you won't have any unfair advantage. And he told us, he was like, look, the best way to grow and the core of every great consumer company is some kind of network. So what is the network you can build that reaches families? And so we got thinking about this and we realized, we're like, well, hold on, I'd been a teacher. And so we're like, well, hold on, teachers are like an incredibly important and the number one most important person here, because teachers are the people that actually deliver the education. It's not like a tech company delivering, it's a person making an education with kids and families. So they're kind of the trusted person here. If we could find a way to be helpful and useful to teachers, maybe then we could get to kids and families. And so that's kind of really the instinct that then led us to speak with hundreds of teachers. So in our first month or two, I spoke with maybe 400 or 500 teachers, and I did everything to get in front of them. It was from spamming, apologies in retrospect, but spamming email lists to I went to teacher meetups. I actually taught summer school at a school in Palo Alto, in exchange for the teachers giving us feedback. And so we basically like used this time to like understand deeply what their deepest problems were. And so we dived in, we really got to the root, and I can tell you more of what we did here, but we got to the roots of a couple of problems that were very real for teachers. The top one that we came up with was very surprising and very non-obvious, which was this thing around classroom management, which is dramatically unsexy. Like no one can even really tell you what that is, but it's like you're a teacher in a classroom of 30 kids. How do you make this a productive learning environment?
Yep.
And what we saw was that for the most part, teachers had these kind of outdated tools around detention and discipline. You wait for something to go wrong and then you punish. And that's the only tool you have. Well, for some teachers, the only tool you have. We thought this was like a very painful problem. And it's one of the biggest reasons for teacher burnout. It's one of the biggest impediments to learning. And we thought, well, what if we flipped that? What if we actually turn it into a positive thing? And so the first thing Dojo built actually wasn't the communication app that it is today. It was actually a point tool that gave teachers a simple way to give kids positive feedback. So as a teacher, you could pick a few values. You could say, being kind, helping each other, asking a good question, whatever you want to encourage in the classroom. And then you could give kids kind of recognition, just digital kind of +1 for asking a question or whatever it was. And that first product became incredibly popular to a degree we couldn't have predicted. It kind of, we went from zero teachers, zero product and zero teachers using a product midway through the incubator to something like around 12,000 teachers or so using it by demo day, which for us was like, it was on the order of about 0.5% of all teachers in the country.
I was going to ask you next, what was the moment when you knew you had product market fit? I think this is a good segue into that. But briefly, to recap what I heard there, it sounds like you did a few things right. One is you spent a lot of time deeply understanding your target customer, which in your case was teachers, and even living the life of a teacher. I mean, you said you'd been a teacher, but it had been a number of years. You had done it outside of the US, so it wasn't necessarily within the US school system. And so there were lessons you needed to learn to really deeply understand and empathize with your target customer. And then two, you built a very simple tool that had the potential to grow into a network, but that initially was just a very simple one-player tool for teachers to be able to give positive feedback to their children. It reminds me a little bit of Instagram in the early days. It's like, come for the tool, stay for the network. Well, originally people were using Instagram just because they had easy access to these cool photo filters, and then it became this whole network. So let's talk more about, when was the moment you knew you had product market fit? It sounds like you had the early signals of it with those 12,000 teachers who signed up during the incubator. And then related to that, once you had initial traction, how did you tap into the network effects that started to exist between teachers, but also between teachers and their students, to then start to get that growth flywheel that Reid Hoffman was talking about going?
So on the first one, on the product market fit, I think initially when we just saw the growth curve of how many people were signing up, we still to this day hadn't spent on paid acquisition, right? So it was just one teacher telling another. So we kind of clearly tapped into something. And so we were feeling pretty good about that, but I'd say that was a false start, right? So in retrospect, we had a great kind of viral word of mouth kind of thing happening. But a few months in, we dug into, we had enough data to look at some cohorts. And so we dug a bit deeper, and basically what we started to see was that retention overall was like fairly mediocre. It wasn't like, like 90% of our cohorts are active like 3 months later or anything. If we just take the data side of it, we're like, oh man, this isn't great. Like, seems like we've got a leaky bucket here. People are picking this up, using it, and then sticking with it for some period of time, and then leaving. But that's easy to misread because we were looking at kind of overall cohorts. What we did next, I think, was maybe one of the most important analyses we've ever done. We started to cut the data by, okay, but who are the people that are actually retaining? And then we looked at those cohorts, and we basically found a subgroup of people that were consistent users. They'd be just as active on day 90 as they were on day 7. And we were like, what is going on here? Like, what have these guys figured out? And so we basically did a lot of qualitative, got on the phone, called people, called teachers, and figured out what they're doing. And basically, they all had a version of the same story, which is that this was the group that was not just using the product in the classroom, but then communicating it at home with parents. And we didn't have any way to communicate with parents. So they were, they'd get to the end of the school week, and they would like screenshot the website, and then they'd attach that to an email, or they'd print out a report and like send that home with kids. And so in some way or another, we found this group that was like hacking, communicating home with families. And we were like, oh man, that makes so much sense, right? Because as you know, like as soon as you have a multiplayer product, it becomes harder for either side to drop off, right? And so we built a great, very useful single player tool. The jump that needed to happen, we realized, was that it had to become a multiplayer kind of product. And in particular, communicating with families was one of the, as mentioned, there's 2 big needs teachers had. That was the second kind of big need that teachers had, was engaging families in their kids' education. And turns out families really want this too, because, it's so weird that this person you love the most in the world is like at home for half the day, but is out of home for half the day. And maybe you get one parent-teacher conference once a semester if you can make it. And like, you wouldn't accept that in any other part of your life for the thing that you care most about. You're like, you kind of want to be engaged and involved and help and support. So what happened next was Dojo we built parent accounts and then kid accounts as well. But basically we went from just the teacher having an account on Dojo to each of these groups having an account, then being able to share pictures, videos, messages through the school day. And so it very quickly went from single player to multiplayer. And that, I think, was real product market fit. That's when we started to see not just the viral kind of growth, but also the stickiness and kind of the retention. That's still been, to me, I still look back on that and I'm like, wow, thank God we took the time to go deeper on that retention analysis.
Yeah. Well, a couple things that stand out for me there. I mean, one is a 2-sided network effect is really powerful, but a 3-sided network effect is even more powerful. And in your case, we're talking about young kids here, so they only play so much of a role, but you do have this 3-sided network between teachers, parents, and students. And so that's really powerful. I guess I'm curious, how did you measure the health of those network effects? Like, what metrics were you looking for? or what sort of qualitative feedback did you find across those three constituencies that told you, okay, this is really working? And then to use your point, it wasn't just driving viral growth through word of mouth, but it was also directly contributing to retention, which was the foundation for ultimately monetizing the business.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways I can answer this, but just to zoom out a little bit, I think it was a year, maybe around this time that we made this switch, that I found this incredible book by Helmer Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
Got the wrong way around, Hamilton Helmer. And it's a book called The Seven Powers, and it basically talks about sources of defensibility.
Yep.
And this basically became like kind of a Bible in the company. I actually had Hamilton come and like lecture the leadership team on it and so on. But it became a bit of a Bible for like how we think about defensibility. And so network effects are one very important source of defensibility, scale economies, brands, switching costs, etc. So I think generally we start to think about how can we deepen defensibility and how can we become an enduring business so that we can serve our customers over the long term rather than just being a flash in the pan. But on network effects, because you asked about them, I think there's a couple of different ways we thought about this. One was just at the classroom level, right? So we discovered that we want teachers to connect with kids and families quite early in the journey. And if they do that, then retention is fantastic, and engagement is fantastic. So retention and engagement are downstream of this kind of early activation action of connecting. And if you connect, that's like the Facebook, 7 friends in 10 days, whatever. Like if you connect, you're going to retain forever or for a very long time. And so that was kind of one of the early kind of inputs that we start to measure quite a lot into longer term retention. The second thing we started to see was Dojo would land in a school with one teacher using it, and then it would start to spread through the school. And we'd have, you'd see it kind of pop up. And just somebody else, I'll show you a map of how this happened, but like, you'd see each school kind of light up a bit more and get a bit dense, and then jump to the next school and light up a bit more and a bit more. And so we started to think a bit about this, like landing and expanding through schools. Now Dojo is used in about 9 out of 10 schools in the country to some degree or another, and many more than that internationally. I think we reach something like 1 in 20 kids on the planet now.
Wow.
In school, yeah. But we thought a lot about this idea of getting to a school and then expanding through the school. Now, one principle I've got in the company is you look for emergent behavior. You kind of heard it in how we found the high retention cohorts, but we look for like what's already working. And so we looked at, well, how in the schools where we are growing, how are we growing? And we basically found that we had usually a very vocal champion. In every school, you have the kind of same technology curve. You have the early adopters, you have like kind of the middle, the group that wants to jump on next, and you have like the laggards who are kind of scared and probably never going to adopt. And so we found these early adopters exist in every school. And they're so excited. They're like, oh my God, I found a thing that solves a problem for me. I want to tell my friends about it. This is one of the wonderful things about teachers is they really want to help. They want to, they're not in it for the money and the fame. They're in it to like help kids. They also want to help other teachers who are helping kids. And so it's just like a wonderful community to be part of. And so we were like, wow, like these teachers are already spreading the word. Like, can we make it easier for them? And so we did like I know, honestly, things that are so, low tech, you might laugh at them, but teachers were like, look, I really want to do a presentation about Dojo in my school. I haven't had time to make a presentation. We're like, oh, you know what? We'll make a presentation for you. We'll make it easy for you. We'll put a QR code at the end. So like your friends can scan it and just join the school. And so you get more teachers on board in your school. But I think one really lovely thing was, it came from our existing teacher community. So I was in a classroom observation. We'd go into the field, we'd go sit in classrooms, see how teachers were using the product. So we're in a classroom in San Francisco. It's a science, I think it's 5th grade science classroom. And there's a teacher named Jenna. And we were observing a class. She was a great teacher. 2 or 3 months later, we get an email from Jenna. And she was like, hey, I've got the summer off, and I might not go back to the classroom. I'd love to come and do an internship with you guys. And I think we were maybe like 6 or 7 people. Like we were tiny, and mostly engineer, a designer here or there. So we don't know what to do with a teacher at the company, but we're very receptive and like welcoming of teachers. We're like, yeah, sure, come and hang out for the summer, and we'll figure something out. So she turns up, and we got so lucky. Like she was an incredibly kind of self-starting person. And so she said, look, like, I'm just going to do a little bit of poking around and figure out how this dojo thing grows. And she came back, and she, at the end of the summer, she'd done this whole analysis. On the surface, she was doing like customer support, but actually she was doing this whole like secret analysis on how dojo grows. And what she showed us was that, the dojo is a community-driven company. So teachers, and now kids and families, but at the time, teachers really made it their own, and they would like tell other teachers about it. She was like, so can we support our community more and more? And so she stood up what we call our mentor community, which are basically our early adopter teachers, most passionate teachers. They're kind of often quite tech savvy. And we kind of brought these, but they're quite isolated because they're maybe the one crazy person in their school or something. We're like, so we brought this community of mentor teachers together. And basically, like, this community is now an incredible source of advice, feedback, encouragement, enthusiasm. Being a teacher is hard. And this community has really supported each other. They've also kind of buoyed dojo. And, I don't think there's any real substitute for that kind of work either. You can't hack it. You kind of have to just put in years of care and conversations and relationship building. And so that was kind of a second thing we did, I think, that has really kind of helped build kind of some of the network of the company.
This episode is brought to you by Paddle. Today's fastest growing apps are multi-channel. They use web monetization to reach new audiences, improve attribution, and boost margins. But selling on the web gets complicated fast. Managing currencies, taxes, fraud, and disputes gets increasingly difficult as companies scale. Paddle solves this. As the merchant of record for thousands of apps, including Runna, GoodNotes, Codeway, and HubX, they take on the complexity of web monetization so you can focus on growing your business. Learn more at paddle.com/subversive. Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of guests on the podcast talk about just how critical community was for their businesses. Rachel Hepworth, who led marketing at Notion for a number of years, talked about how important it was for them because they have such a horizontal product that people don't know where to begin. And so having an evangelist community helps you plug into a product like Notion. In your case, it sounds like it was more, being a teacher is a really hard job, particularly in the US. And so having a community of teachers to evangelize ClassDojo, help new teachers figure out how to use the platform and get value out of it was really productive. And then it also obviously contributes to organic word of mouth and retention, which we already talked about. Let's start to transition a little bit into monetization. So we already talked about how from the very beginning, you decided to eschew the more classic path of B2B sales, selling into schools and districts, which turned out to work really well for getting this flywheel going because you really had to do the hard work to figure out the network effects between teachers, parents, and students. Eventually, you did start to monetize, and you did that primarily, at least in the beginning, through premium features for families through your ClassDojo Plus subscription. But your distribution was still coming largely from teachers, and I imagine that might have created a little bit of tension. So how did you navigate getting that monetization flywheel going, but still preserving trust with your teachers who were driving the growth of the product?
I'll say it was a very nervous time in the company. So I think we were 6, maybe 7 years into the company, and we hadn't monetized. The reason was we'd taken Reed's advice really to heart. We're like, look, we're going to prioritize building a community, building a network, and if we can build the leading network for our demographic, which had never been built before, it's a long shot. But if we could build it, then we thought, well, we'll have a lot of time and lots of ways that we could monetize and build a great business. If we never build a network, then we're just going to run out of growth channels, and it's not going to be like an enduring business. So we really focused on the network to start with, but it led to this odd-shaped company where it's 6 years in, $0 of revenue. I think we're like 25 people. So it's very small. I remember the year that we decided, okay, this is the year of monetization. We're like, oh, we think we've got to enough scale that we are now, that we think, the leading kind of network or community, and we've identified how we grow, and we think that's somewhat repeatable. So now let's make this sustainable. We make money so that we can make more impact. And so then the question became, okay, well, what do we do? How do we monetize, and how do we maintain trust? And like you said, I think one thing was very clear. We'd seen company after company go after this very traditional business model. As I said earlier, like, there's nothing per se wrong with that. However, I do think incentives dictate a lot, right? And so what we see with some of these companies was that they end up chasing budget. Like, where is the budget available? Let's just do that thing. And this is fine. Districts have real needs, and we're sympathetic and empathic to those. But again, the impact is for kids and families and teachers, right? And so we wanted to retain a focus on solving real problems at the grassroots kind of level. I think the second thing we saw is the incentive corruption became, let's just chase the richest school districts, because they can pay us the contract and so on and so on, and skip the kids that need it the most, but our mission is to give every kid on earth an education they love. So it's kind of like incompatible with the mission to just serve like a small fraction of the population. It's also, I think, frankly, not good for the customer. I think school districts for a long time have just been burned by education technology where the product's not that great, but they get sold and then no one knows how to get them out. And so anyhow, so from the start, we're like, look, we're gonna do something for families. We think we're gonna do something compelling for families, and we think that's better alignment incentives. So the first monetization we had really came from this thought experiment. We're like, look, if you have $50,000 to spend, you may send your kid to private school, but the majority of the world doesn't have $50,000 to spend on education. Right? If you have like $100 a year, and so this kind of started to feel a bit like, I think we were inspired by like Amazon and Netflix and Spotify. We're like, well, I think Jeff Bezos famously talked about Prime is like, we want it to be so valuable that it would be irresponsible not to buy it. That's kind of what Amazon Prime is, the best $100 you can spend as a consumer. I think of that for Netflix and Spotify too, where I'm like, can this be the best $100 you spend on entertainment or the best $100 you spend on music? And so, I'm kind of interested and convinced that there's going to be like a Prime type thing for education. And that's, I think, what ClassDojo Plus it was birthed from. This is our subscription for families. And so we're like, look, can we build a product or build something that's so valuable that it'll just be a no-brainer for families to buy it? And that's kind of where we want to go with Plus. So that's still the vision. What we practically started with was just a few optional extras. So we had this principle where like, we don't want to block learning. So you're like, well, what do you charge for if you're not charging for learning? Well, maybe we can charge for convenience. Maybe we can charge for some optional extras that some people have told us they want, but which don't get in the way of your kid learning. It also meant we were never going to do a hard paywall. So you never have to pay if you don't want to. Today it's about 5% of our base pays for something on Dojo. So there's many more that could, but like that builds a great business. And it also funds everybody else getting access to Dojo for free forever, which I think is quite important. So, the first kind of set of features that we built were very, I'd say small. One of them was this feature called Memories, where instead of scrolling down, pages and pages to see your kids' photos through the year, we give you like a nicely formatted album. It's kind of like a yearbook, and some parents really want that, this digital kind of yearbook idea. And if you want that, you can get that here, and that was like one of these nice optional extras that felt quite good. And there's like 2 or 3 other features that we bundled into there as well. But so we kind of, we'd arrived at a couple of these principles. And then I think what was very important to us was that we communicated to teachers ahead of time. So it wasn't a surprise to them. And so we were able to tell teachers, hey, look, like ClassDojo is going to be free for you forever. It's going to be free for kids and families to use forever. We're going to introduce some optional extras that some families can buy if they want to. They never have to if they don't want to. But some families we think will find them very useful and want to buy them. And, we just want to give you the heads up that this is kind of how this becomes a great business so we can build even more useful stuff for you down the road. And I think that communication itself was like very trust building. Because when do companies tell you that? They just do things to you for the most part. And we were like, can we build this with you? I think that was an important move.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing some really important lessons there. One is sort of obvious, but it's remarkable how many companies get it wrong. And that is, start with what's best for your customer, not what's best for your business. And for you, that began with, we're not just going to go sell to schools, because that will lead us down the path of only selling to the elite schools with the biggest budgets, which will deviate us pretty quickly from our core mission. And that is serving students and their parents and the teachers teaching those children. So that's number one. But then number two, in order to keep your organic flywheel going, which had been so critical for cost-efficient growth, you made a conscious decision not to have a hard paywall and to ensure that the core experience of ClassDojo continued to be free for everyone. But then you had these delightful features that parents could purchase to make their children's education just a little bit better at an affordable price point that was, under $100 a year. And so that allowed you to get, to some extent, the best of both worlds. You preserve that organic flywheel, but you're able to capture, you said, roughly 5% of your user base is now paying for the premium version of the product, ClassDojo Plus, which then subsidizes it for everyone else to be able to access it. And then I guess another point is, it sounds like you very deliberately decided not to run ads, which is a choice you could have gone with in order to monetize the user base that way. But then you're sort of extracting value from your user base by trying to sell them things, as opposed to getting the subset who are getting enough value out of it to pay for a subscription. And so all of that led to a very healthy core business, even if it started small, built on a thriving network that you didn't disrupt with your paywall. And so now I want to get to how you've continued to use the strength and the health of that core network as a launch pad for more and more new products. So you've launched some products recently. You've got ClassDojo Tutor, you've got Sparks, you've got Islands, which is your new game product. Let's talk a little bit about each one of those and how you're thinking about how those products fit into the broader puzzle that is your vision for ClassDojo in the long run.
As you know subscription apps so well. I think a lot of subscription apps I've seen basically grow by either like bolting on more features or creating more tiers of subscription or so on, right? What we realized was that we've built this distribution, this network, and I think we've earned and continue to earn. I mean, it's a daily work, but continue to earn trust with our user base. And so our thought was like, can we use that to build whole new businesses for our customers and just tweaking the subscription? A couple of guiding principles here. One was that when everyone joins Dojo, I have a document called the mission, strategy, and moats for the company. Everybody reads it, and it's got this simple guiding principle for everything we do at ClassDojo. It's like our number one overall thing, which is that always do what is in the long-term best interest of kids. So like that's when we start to think about launching new businesses, like that's kind of the overarching principle. You kind of start with the customer and work from there. And so the business model, the products, all these things have to align with that overall principle. And so we don't do things that just like, steal kids' attention, wherever we try to optimize for what is in the long-term best interest of kids. So then what we started to do is we looked at all the needs that kids and families have. And we're like, which of these needs can we serve? And so I'll tell you about the second business we launched after Plus. This was some years ago. We talk with our families a lot. Like it's a very customer-centric company, like hundreds of interviews happening every week. One of the things that we started to hear over and over was that families want more attention for their kids than just what they get in school. Yeah. And so you might call this tutoring, you might call it something else, but like, families like, I feel my kid is either ahead of class and bored or behind class and stressed and worried. I would love for them to get more attention than just, being lost in like a 30-person classroom. But like, I don't know what to do, Now, there's a small fraction of the population that goes and gets a tutor, right? And they can afford it, and it's very obvious where to go, and probably their friends have one and all the rest of it. But we're like, well, hold on, there's a large chunk of families that wants more attention for their kid, but they don't know where to go. They don't know how to find someone that they trust. They don't know if they can find someone affordable. They don't know how to take all the friction out of that experience. And so, I think some people had assumed that tutoring was just reserved for like, the top 1% or something that were interested in it. I think there's many more people that are interested if you can remove the friction. I think it's like a market expansion thing. And so we realized, well, hold on, we've got many teachers on Dojo. We've also got many families. What if we start to match families with a great teacher? And could be a win-win-win. And because they're already on Dojo, we don't have to go and pay to acquire new users. So we might be able to pass on lower prices to families and also better earnings for teachers. And because we don't have all the marketing costs in the middle. So could that work? And so we actually found a company that was doing this in South America. It was a small business. It was another YC company. They didn't quite raise the next round of funding, but we asked the founders to join us, and they're fantastic. They rebuilt that business on Dojo. And so it started as a tutoring marketplace, connecting kids with and families with great teachers, and that just started to explode. Initially it was math and reading, K-5, just in the US. That business has grown like very substantially. It's a great second business. But what's amazing is 3 out of 4 families who are paying for the tutor business have never paid for a tutor before in their lives. So we're actually like expanding the market here of people that want this but couldn't have it before because the price is lower, it's easy to get to, it's safe, they know the quality is guaranteed. We underwrite the quality, and so that kind of second business just started to flourish. It's expanding into different verticals, different subjects. Into I think we launched group classes last quarter, so now you can get small groups of up to 6 or 7 of your friends on there instead of just one-on-one. And so I think that's been pretty exciting as a second business. I can tell you about the next two if you want.
Yeah, let's get into it. They're both very interesting bets, and so feel free to spend as much or as little time on each as you want. But I'm curious to hear how you see them fitting into, as you put it, the mission and the strategy for ClassDojo over the next 5 to 10 years, in the same way that Tutor has fit into it.
Yeah, totally. So the next one was honestly a little bit of an oddball one. But this came from a lot of anxiety that we heard from families in the pandemic. Everyone was online a lot of the time. And we talk to families and say, hey, where are your kids spending time? And, what are you excited about that? What are you worried about? And basically the universal message was families are like, my kids spend way too much time on screens. When they are on screens, I don't know what they're doing. I've heard that they're on some of these online games. I'm really worried about that because they don't feel safe. And I think they're around a whole bunch of creepy strangers, And then there's like a bunch of press articles that came out that didn't help. And we're like, families are kind of right to be worried because most products on the internet were never built to be great for young kids. Like they just weren't built for kids. They were built for adults, and, kids find their way onto them, and they're not necessarily built by any of the right assumptions for young kids. And, we started to think about this. And my co-founder, Liam, had been at JagX, which built one of the big kids' worlds. We met the founder of Club Penguin around this time. We met a few early Roblox team. And we were like, well, hold on. Dojo's got this very unique position because we know we've got basically like a kid's relationship graph on Dojo. We know who the trusted people in your life are, who the adults are, who your friends are. So we want to make a place where you can be with just your friends. So no random strangers, no one else allowed. It's just you and people that you trust. And so we ended up building this place called Dojo Islands, which so that the idea is it's every group of kids gets an island. They get to build the island together. It's very Minecraft-like. And then to discover games and experiences on this island built by all the other kids in the world. And so you kind of get like both the creator aspect, you get the building aspect. And so we introduced this and we're like, look, like this might be, like the idea was, can we make the best place on the internet for kids? I don't think kids spend their whole lives on screens, but if they are going to be on a screen, can we make it a great place? That is with friends, that is constructive, that, isn't like sending surprise bills to parents, all the usual problems, We're like, well, so we gave ourselves this challenge. Can we build the best place on the internet for kids? Like a digital playground that's so great that parents will feel great about, that kids will enjoy. And, I think we built the first version of it. We launched it some years ago, quietly. And it's been really amazing to watch it grow. And so we can talk a bit more about that, but that's the high level. Most recent product, which we launched last year, is kind of our most AI native one. You heard me talk about tutoring earlier. There's this whole category of services, or many categories of services actually, that many more people would benefit from if they could get access to them. But they've been so human capital constrained and therefore so expensive that it's very difficult for most people to have a personal or a private doctor and a personal chef and a personal nutritionist and a private tutor for your kids. These things are luxury goods for the most part. But AI obviously reduces the cost of providing at least part of those services. We think there's going to be a great AI tutor for kids. What does it look like? Can we build one? Are we even, do we even have a right to build one? We realized, well, we're in this unique position between having distribution, having trust, and then also having a lot of context on how kids are learning and what they're learning, that we really could try to build one of the best AI tutors for kids. And so we ended up focusing on a specific problem, which is learning to read. This is a universal problem. Every family knows that at some point they have to solve this. It's also just not very well done. So in the US, it's something like 7 out of 10 10-year-olds don't read at proficiency. This is in the 2024 NAEP scores, like the reading kind of scores. And 4 out of 10 are below the most basic level. So these are like the worst scores we've had in like 20 years. Should be very concerning because reading is like the gateway skill for all other learning. It's even pretty bad internationally. It's like 7 or 8 out of 10 kids around the world struggle to read and understand a simple story by age 10.
Wow.
And so, like, this is like UNESCO's, they call it the learning poverty measure. Now, the cool thing is the science of how to teach reading is really well understood. So science of reading, phonics, it's like pretty well established. So our CTO actually built a product initially for his own kids, which took the science of reading and turned it into this delightful kind of Duolingo-like game. It's perfectly adaptive to the child, so it listens and speaks back to the child. It uses AI in the background to moderate the difficulty level, so we're really kind of guiding you along that kind of optimal learning path. But it's really fun. Like, kids love doing it. In fact, one of the tweaks we had to make was we capped engagement at 15 minutes a day. So it wouldn't be like unlimited screen time, so it was just highly effective 15 minutes. But we launched this last year, and it's called Dojo Sparks. It's been pretty incredible. So it's one of our fastest growing products ever. We got some early results back. We're seeing kids go 2 grade levels higher in reading proficiency. So it's about 2 years of progress in about 4 or 5 months. About 15 minutes a day. So it's really quite amazing. And that's available for families. And, I kind of think it's like a very exciting vision where we could take some of the basics like literacy, maybe numeracy one day, and do them in a much more accelerated way so that the classroom, the teacher can start to do many more interesting things that you can only do in a classroom. Trying to teach every individual kid in the classroom is quite difficult. AI can support there. And then we can free up the classroom for, do creative projects, build things together, do real world stuff together. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the through line across all 3 of those products, Tutor, Islands, and most recently Sparks, is that you were able to harness the power of your network, which from the very beginning you treated as the sacred core of the business, in order to have unfair advantages, in many cases around distribution, to be able to offer a service that would probably not be economical for anybody else to offer. You talked about how for Tutor it was matching students with teachers who were already on Dojo in a tutor relationship, which normally would not be very cost efficient because you have to acquire both sides of the marketplace, and that's very expensive. But in your case, you already have both sides of the marketplace, and you're passing that efficiency on to your users in the form of lower costs. Then with Islands, it was the relationship graph. It was the fact that you already knew who these children's trusted teachers, parents, and friends were. And so you can create this ecosystem in a game-like environment like Minecraft where they can interact safely with other people they know and trust. And then with Sparks, it was all of your data and understanding around how children and teachers are using the existing platform in order to then leverage AI to create a much lower cost version of a tutor that was AI powered. But all 3 of those were rooted, if I'm understanding correctly, in the unfair advantage you've built around your network, which just shows how powerful that asset can be over time if you nurture it correctly. Since you ended with Sparks, I'd love to close before we get to our lightning round in talking about what your vision looks like for Dojo in 2030. And then specifically, obviously, smartphones was a big tailwind that got you to this point, but now AI is this brand new tailwind that has all sorts of potential for where you take ClassDojo going forward. And so how does AI factor into your vision for the next 5 years?
Well, look, I feel very fortunate to have lived through and be living through these technological waves. Without smartphones, we never would have been able to connect to people. And without AI, I don't think we'd be able to deliver kind of personalized learning in the way that I think we will. But just to zoom out a little bit, overall, my hope, my aspiration for Dojo is that it's a company that stands for flourishing, for human flourishing. And we're starting with kids. And so this mission is very real for us, like creating a world where every kid gets an education they love, one that makes the most of their talents and capacities. That's really like real for me. And so the 2 parts of that are, how do you reach every kid? And then how do you give each kid these kind of learning experiences they love? And so I think smartphones were part of the answer to the first part. It was like, that tailwind gave us some distribution and growth. AI is an amazing answer to the second part. So you probably know this, but there's this one of these old findings education from like 40 years ago. It's called Bloom's 2 sigma observation, which was that one-on-one tutoring can move a kid 2 standard deviations up if you just go versus a traditional kind of classroom. And so that to put that in context, that's taking someone from like the 50th percentile to the 98th percentile. just by changing the method of instruction. If you just got individual attention, but the challenge is that's never been able to scale. It's like far too expensive to, it has been to give every kid a personal attention. And I think AI just makes it feasible and scalable for every kid. And so, like in Spark's case, I think we're able to give children a perfectly adaptive, endlessly patient, infinitely compassionate, very engaging way to learn to read, to get basic literacy handled. And I think that's very exciting to me. So I think to the extent that AI can help deliver some of these foundations in literacy and numeracy and bring up the floor, I think that would be a pretty amazing contribution. I think what we have to be careful with is that friction is inherently part of learning. You have to like struggle and grapple with things in order to learn. And AI reduces all the friction, So like, what do you do? There's this great essay by historian Niall Ferguson, and I think it was called "The Starship and the Cloister," or "The Cloister and the Starship," something like that. But he basically talks about he was applying it to higher education, but I think it's pretty broadly applicable. It talks about the environments that you want to spend time in, and what those environments develop in you. So the Starship is this environment where you have unfettered access to all of the latest technology. And this environment, I think, develops in you facility with these tools, like an ability to work with the tools of the future. And I think it's good to spend time in that environment. However, it's not the only environment you want to spend time in. The other environment is what I think of as the cloister, where it's just you with maybe a difficult problem or a hard text. Maybe you have a few friends around, and you kind of have to figure it out. And you have to like build that kind of self-reliance and ability to figure things out. And I think that's also an excellent environment to spend time in. So, all this is to say, I think like when I think 2030 vision for Dojo, what I'm hoping we can do is we can reach every kid and family on the planet. And I really do mean that. We're talking with a lot more national governments now about ways we can help. But I hope we can reach every kid on the planet. And then I hope we can deploy for each of those kids the right sets of products and services that help them learn and grow and, basically make the most of their talents and capacities. That's what I'd like to be doing in 2030.
Yeah. Well, what an inspirational vision. And as a father myself, it's certainly one I hope you succeed at, because my children will personally benefit, as will any other parents. So best of luck with that, and certainly rooting for you. I'll also say one other thing, which is, one of the fun things about being a podcast host is I can draw connections across the many different guests and episodes I've had. And actually, our very last episode was Essen Durrani, who's the co-founder and CEO of a rapidly growing AI EdTech company called StudyFetch. And he talked specifically about how their AI intentionally does not give away easy answers to the student. Like it does, It presents a certain amount of intentional friction to force the student to truly learn. Because it used to be the game of college was, you go get good enough grades, you get enough B's, like you graduate with a high enough GPA, you go get your job, and then you figure out your career on the job. That's no longer going to work. Like at this point, you really need hard skills to succeed, and that's only going to get more and more true over time with AI. And so it's become all the more important to like truly generate real learning, as opposed to just helping students get the grades they need to get their job and move on with their lives. So in both cases, I feel like you all are thinking about it the right way and using AI in helpful versus harmful ways to help children of different age groups learn productively. Let's wrap up with our lightning round. This is always a fun way to end every episode.
Check it off. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll keep it fairly short and light here. The first one is the question I ask every guest, and that is, what's the best part about working at ClassDojo? And then as the founder and CEO, you obviously have a lot of control over the culture. So what's one thing you're actively working to change and make better?
Oh, man. Well, one thing, look, like, I think the thing that I love is just this idea of like talent density. Like it's a very small team. It's like on the order of about 200 people serving, 50 million kids. So like, it's a tiny group. It's all hand selected. You can walk into any room and just like the brain power kind of lights up the room. And like that, it's like a great feeling to be around that, things that I'm working to change. I really wish a long time ago we'd been able to afford just dojo.com. Don't have the cost, but yeah, maybe that's just a super visual one. I think one thing for me, look, as companies grow, I think a natural instinct, I don't think we have this at Dojo, but a natural instinct is that they start to reward the wrong things. And one of the things you reward is people doing nothing. You start to avoid errors of initiative. and you start to like reward errors of inaction, you're like, you didn't do anything, so you can't have done anything wrong. Whereas actually what you want to recognize and reward is like errors that come from taking initiative and from boldness.
Yeah.
I think that's something that like I just want to be very vigilant over as we grow. I just want to continue to have this entrepreneurial, initiative-driven, kind of bold, risk-taking attitude.
I mean, it's always nicer to have a shorter domain. So I love the dojo.com point, but the second point I truly love, because I think that's so spot on. It's like the people taking the biggest risks are often the ones solving the hardest and most important problems, but they're also the ones who are going to make the most mistakes because they're working on the hardest stuff. And you need a culture that rewards that versus punishes it. Next question, if you could go back and do one thing differently in your journey building ClassDojo, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. There's a lot, but I think one of the ones that comes to mind is we didn't go international in any kind of intentional way. It just kind of happened to us. And I think in retrospect, I would have gone international in a more concerted and more rigorous way. We kind of got yanked into it. And now, we do a great job now, but it was a rough ride.
Yeah, fair. And I've yet to find a company that has done it perfectly. I think it's just inherently pretty messy. I happen to have worked on international expansion at both Quizlet and Fair, the company I worked at after Quizlet, and it's just hard. And both of those companies ultimately figured it out, but it's not. There's no clean and easy path. What's the most creative thing you've seen kids build or do inside Dojo Islands?
Oh my gosh, this is a constant source of joy. The stuff that we get posted in like customer support, whatever. But I mean, just because World Cup is on, we've seen a lot of kids build like soccer stadiums with like complete
cool
games happening in there. I think one of the fun ones I saw was this is on YouTube actually. Some kids had like made videos to tell the story and using what they're doing in Dojo Islands as like the visuals for those videos. So it's kind of like just creating stories based in Dojo Islands, which was super cute.
Huh, that's fun. I'm a huge soccer fan. I grew up playing soccer, and of course Lionel Messi. Given my age, I've grown up with him. He's my favorite player. So watching him be so successful in what it will probably be his last World Cup has just been such a joy to watch.
It's pretty incredible.
Last couple here. What's the most profound way you think AI will change education in the coming years? I'm sure there are many things you could point to, but if you just had to pick one, what would it be?
Maybe I'll point to a counterintuitive one. I hope we get less mind-numbing time on screens. I think AI gives us the chance to build really incredible products that help kids learn. And so I hope time on screen becomes far more nourishing. And then I think we have time off screen to develop all these more human traits, like how do you collaborate and do things with other people and yada, yada, yada. So I hope both of those effects happen.
Yeah, I love that. Well, it's funny because we talked about the two tailwinds earlier being smartphones and now AI. And smartphones created all of the mind-numbing screen time. Yeah. I guess you already had TV, but smartphones made it worse. Hopefully AI can reverse some of that. And then the last one, and feel free to share as much or as little as you want here, but I'm curious how ClassDojo's mission of giving every child an education they love feels personal for you now and where you expect to go in the future.
Oh, man. Well, look, I think everyone that's considering becoming a parent probably feels that quite personally. Although I'll say when we started, Liam and I were not parents. And I think for me, a lot of it came from my parents, actually. Like I grew up, my dad's from Pakistan. He grew up in a little village in Pakistan, not much economic opportunity. But he just kind of worked really hard at school, was fortunate to have a few great teachers, got to the UK, became a doctor. I was born in the UK, grew up there. If he hadn't done that journey, I wouldn't be sitting here talking with you. And so he kind of was able, through a combination of great educational experiences from a very humble background, to give us a much better life. And so I think wouldn't it be cool if you could give every kid on the planet a chance to make the most of what they've got?
Yeah, I love that. And that's come up on a few of our episodes. You talked at the very beginning about how energy and education were the two things you considered devoting your early career to. And energy is foundational to everything. So if you look at it from the standpoint of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need energy before anything else matters. But what's amazing about education is it just unlocks so much uncapped upside, not just for the individual, but for society, because that person then goes on and does great things, which benefits everyone around them. And so it's such an important field, and it's great to see ClassDojo doing so much good in that field. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a joy of an episode. Anything you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
Oh, well, Phil, thanks for having me on. It's such a joy to be here. For audience, look, I really think you've got a group of people here that's trying to build a company that champions the best interests of kids. And so if you're interested in being part of it, supporting, joining the cause, I'd love to hear from you. It's just sam@classdojo.com.
Excellent. It's a great opportunity. And best of luck, Sam.
Cheers, Bill. Thanks.
Thanks again to RevenueCat for sponsoring this episode. If you're building a subscription app, you can use RevenueCat to power purchases, optimize paywalls, offer discounts, handle refunds, manage customer data, run A/B tests, generate insights, and unlock more revenue. I work with dozens of subscription apps, and most of them are already using RevenueCat to power their businesses. Learn more at revenuecat.com/subversive.